here for a dual stream. You could be watching on Archaeology with Flint Dibble, or you might be watching on Pete Kelly's channel. Pete Kelly, of course, is the brains behind History Time, the brains and the image behind History Time. Let's quickly have a little musical interlude for my fans. We have a new song coming up. All right, so we got some people in the door. We're here. It's really a pleasure to meet you, Pete. I've been watching your channel for years. As I think I told you, one of the first videos I saw was when you covered Nicoria in the southwest of the Peloponnese, because I studied the bones for my PhD. And in fact, my last little segment here, we're going to go dive into Nicoria.
Amazing.
Yeah, so big fan. You put together some of the best videos on YouTube, I think, and the attention you get, I think, shows that. So very good to have you on.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to meet you too. I've been following your work as well.
Good. Yeah. We got to build our ecosystem.
Absolutely. And you were introduced to me by the great Stefan Milo as well. So I'm sure everybody's heard of Stefan, great archaeology video producer. So yeah, thanks to him for linking us up.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. Thanks to Stefan. I had him on recently, and I've actually known him for a while. We'll talk about the Griffin Warrior tomb. In his book, he came to me because he wanted to do a segment on the Griffin Warrior. So he has a little cartoon of me and Allie Fields, who we'll see a photo of Allison in a bit, because we excavated most of the dirt from that tomb, actually. So, yeah, on that note, we have some fun things to talk about for everybody. We are going to talk about our top marvels. Oh, wait, I want this to look like that. Yeah, that's better, but you should be on top. There we go. The marvels of the Mycenaeans. And wow, I totally forgot to put my color scheme in. You should be orange, okay? These are my colors, all right? I got to stick to my colors. And so, yeah, and just a reminder to everybody before we jump in, make sure to give these a likes and comments afterwards to feed the algorithm machine so people see this, because we want to share real good archaeology. So what me and Pete have done is Pete suggested that we each come up with our top 5 favorite things about the Mycenaean world. Mine, as a teacher and somebody who's excavated a lot of Mycenaean sites, I realized I need to cut mine down to 4, or this is going to be like a 4-hour stream. So I've cut mine down to 4. And I think what we'll do is we'll give Pete the floor to start, because you can start and end, and then I'll take the middle segments along the way. So you want to talk first about engineering.
Great. Well, I'm sure, as many of you know, one of the main fascinating things about the Mycenaean world is the Cyclopean masonry. So these incredible walls that were so amazing that classical era Greeks thought that they could only have been built by the Cyclopses. And these things are massive. As you can see in this image, the blocks dwarf a human being. And they're like absolutely massive. And Mycenae, this is the wall of Dyme, I should say. This is in like the northwestern Peloponnese.
Never been there. Okay.
It's an unknown place. When I visited, there was nobody else there. Apart from
I've seen some of the stuff in the museum at Patras, but I've never been to the actual site.
Yeah, I think Patras was kind of like the main center, because that's got the tombs. There are no tombs in the wall of Dyme, but it's fascinating place. It's a big citadel reused in the classical era, then the medieval era, and then even in World War II, as many of them are. But yeah, big masonry there. But the most famous examples are kind of like Mycenae, Tiryns, Medea. That's Medea there. So massive, huge walls. And these things, they're just so incredibly impressive to see. And correct me if I'm wrong, Flint, but we know there are quarries as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we have evidence for quarrying of this material, especially near Medea. Guy and others have excavated it. Yeah.
So that, and I know of one quarry near Mycenae itself that was pointed out to me on the roadside as we drove past. And like, these guys were so good at what they were doing. They were erecting these massive citadels, which just amazing. Some of the greatest achievements in Europe at that time. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, Flint, but it seems to me that some of these techniques were coming in from the East.
Yes.
What do you think about that? I mean,
well, there's some good evidence. Nick Blackwell, who's a good friend of mine, he recently published a reanalysis of the sawing of the lion over the Lion's Gate. Yeah. And so he was able to reconstruct the saw itself and how it was worked. And so he showed how that specific technique came from the East. But certainly there's a huge amount of connections from, so there's this trade that goes, I'm going the wrong way because I showed it goes like this. So from Egypt up to Crete, up to the mainland, and then across to what's modern day Turkey, then down the Middle East, and then back to Egypt again, based on how the currents would go. And materials moving kind of in this way with shipwrecks and like the Uluburun shipwreck.
Oh, the Uluburun shipwreck.
They show that actual happening, the port to port to port trade. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And the Uluburun shipwreck is such an international ship. Like, there are things from all over the Aegean world in that. Yeah. Including like the Levant, Hittite Empire, etc., Egypt, all sorts of places. So I mean, that shows the interconnectedness of the world. But these citadels with the huge cyclopean walls, they're not alone. So there are amazing other engineering achievements as well. An entire road system goes all through the Argolid. So I mean, okay, this is.
Oh yeah.
So go forward one. All right, here we go. So this is a dam. This is the Tiryns Dam.
Beautiful.
Huge engineering achievement.
This right here where my mouse is, by the way, guys. It's all that rubble stuff. It's actually massive. I mean, if you this is like walking up an enormous hill. If you were to get up it, and so it's an enormous dam. It's really
I'm
cool.
sure you spent much time here, Flint.
Yeah, well, I actually excavated at Mycenae my very first year in Greece back in 2007.
Incredible.
And I'm not going to talk about that excavation just because I was on it for very short. I've been working in this region in the Argolid and nearby for back from 2007 till about 2011 in this region. Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll speak more about this in your section as well. But just to briefly say, this is one of the bridges. This is the Kazama Bridge.
Kazama, exactly.
And this is like one of the only things that survives. Basically, there would have been more of these things probably in the past, and you can still drive a car over this bridge.
Yeah, there's a cool cartoon online. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find this cartoon really quickly because it's a really nice one. Here it is. I found it.
Oh, excellent! Here we go.
So they sort of show it in context here.
Yes.
And you can see how big it is. And it's a really cool bridge. And I think that you bringing up engineering first is important because this is what's so visible in the landscapes.
It is.
Is this kind of engineering projects, these large scale projects.
Wide enough for a chariot to ride along it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there are more roads, and there are like roads from Mycenae going outwards. To different sections. There's a road, correct me if I'm wrong again, but from Mycenae going out to Epidaurus, kind of to the west of the in the Peloponnese, the west in the Argolid. And
so there's a whole network. Yeah.
A whole network. So you got to think these are like motorways at the time. These, people are kings and travelers and traders are riding along these roads. going from settlement to settlement, and it just fascinates me. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
So something you can't usually see. Did you know that there's still wheel ruts from those carts that would go along these roads in some sections?
I've read this. Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
they intentionally groove these wheel ruts in, so it acts kind of like a railroad in a sense. So it's a lot easier to drive along by keeping your wheels in the ruts itself.
Yes. So you stay in the exact position that you're supposed to be in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for most of the road network, I think most of what we have are, I mean, we don't have many bridges like this.
Yeah, there are not many.
There's not many bridges like this.
This is the best example.
Yeah, definitely. And I have this one also later in mind. We prepared these independently, by the way, so we have a little bit of overlap, a little bit not overlap, but yeah. So it's the wheel ruts, and then it's oftentimes the terraces for the roads themselves that tell us where these road systems would be, and we just have little patch here, little patch there, and we can kind of guess where they'd go through the mountains and things like that in the valleys.
If you have a small bit of road in the middle of nowhere, I mean, that wasn't just by itself, was it? That's the bit that survived, you know, because all of, you know, when agriculture is done for 3,500 years or whatever, since this was 3,200 years since this was built, it's going to remove a lot of these features.
Yeah. Agriculture, cities, everything.
So we've really only got fragments, but the fragments that we can see are incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
No, I fully agree.
There would have been much more as well in the past.
Oh God, yeah, we have a fraction of a fraction. Yeah, very little, and we can see that as well. Yeah,
yeah. So if you go back one slide, one more. Here is another absolutely incredible engineering achievement. This is, as far as I'm aware, the biggest Mycenaean citadel of them all, which is Glar, which is in Boeotia, sort of near to Orchomenos, not too far from Thebes. And basically all of the land around it was originally a lake.
Yeah.
And what they did was, the Mycenaeans, they built dams and channels all around the landscape, and they drained this lake into some of the best farmland in the entire area. And that's an incredible achievement in the Bronze Age.
And this, what we're seeing here, is drained because this is in the 19th century. In fact, I have an image from my section on this. You jumped ahead of me. Here is that, which is fine. This is Gla in Assassin's Creed.
You could talk at length about this.
No. Let's just do it right this second. In Assassin's Creed, they show the lake around it.
Nice.
And so, yeah, so I have a similar photo. This is Gla here, but this photo is by Christofilis Megidis, who actually was the director at Mycenae when I excavated it. And this map here is by Antonia Stamos, who is a leading GIS and mapping expert in the Greek world. So this shows, so the red dot here is Gla, and this entire area is Lake Copais. And so it was actually not drained again until the 19th century. And it was when it was drained that they were able to find the different dams and the plugs and the different things that let it actually drain out to create this very fertile farmland. Yeah, I'm working on a project now at a UMBC where I'm studying the animal bones, but they're excavating in this region as well to find more material. I actually haven't been to Greece for that project yet. I need to go. Yeah.
And it's interesting stuff. I mean, that's a big engineering achievement for a very long time ago. Yeah,
it's a massive thing, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah, and I can't think of many other achievements of that scale that the Mycenaeans did. I mean, it's massive, huge scale.
Yeah, there's some thoughts on ports and things like that. That different people have put together where it could be a similar-ish scale of engineering the landscape. So that I don't have that in here, but I was going to talk. I was going to also talk about engineering, but thinking about it on a landscape term, because you know we have these massive monuments, and they're really freaking cool. I love them, and like, don't get me wrong, I've excavated here at the Palace of Nestor at Pylos to help put in the trenches where the new roof pillars are. If you go visit today, there's a new roof that was built not that long ago. But it's these kind of landscape engineering projects that are so we miss them. They're off the beaten path, like this bridge here. This poem, by the way, is by Alicia Stallings, who she gave me her book that this is in, and she's now the Oxford professor of poetry for the year. And here it is. This is about this bridge. Beside the culvert of cement, beside the ill-made potholed modern road, the cyclopean boulders hold their poise, and the keyhole of the corbelled arch bears their load. Atop goat droppings tell that is still in use, at least for goats. This bridge that shouldered soldiers on the march and chariots and harvest-laden carts over the sudden moats. The torrents of the rainy equinox now from its century-dark archway pour, and back again there dive a host of stings, the sweetness hoarding wild black bees they hive. Here in the hollow in the rocks upon which leans the bridge, and gather gold dust for their queen, out over hills pockmarked with looted tombs, across eons that span from ridge to ridge.
I love this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, while you were introducing this poem, the internet dropped out for me, so I couldn't hear who had written this poem.
This is Alicia Stallings. Here, wait, I probably have her book here, don't I? Here it is. No. Well, Alicia Stallings, she is now, I have her book. She gave me her book that this poem is in. She's now the professor of poetry at Oxford for the year, or maybe she's just finishing up her term.
Very cool.
But yeah, so she lives in Greece, and she's married to a Greek, and she's American though, so she's a poet, and she writes some badass poetry actually. Some of it's quite really badass. Nice. And this one though, of course, is about this bridge. So it's one of my favorites because, especially with the goat droppings. Anybody, you spent a lot of time hiking through Greece, as I can tell, and you've probably encountered a lot of goat droppings and sheep droppings.
Oh yeah.
How do you tell the difference between sheep and goat bones?
You tell me.
You don't most of the time because they're so similar. Now, how about between sheep and goat turds?
Maybe some of the goats are bigger. I don't. Been some pretty big goats out there.
Argued about this forever while doing a survey, and I think the sheep have the larger turds while the goats have the little pellets.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Some of those goats are quite impressive, though, aren't they? With the huge horns. And I don't know if it's maybe the male goat, but they're massive, absolutely huge.
Yeah, they are. Oh, those would probably be male, though. It's not always sexually dimorphic, the horns.
I always think it's like Pan, the god Pan, or something. You're out there, and it's like, ooh. Interesting.
100%.
Yeah. You can see the inspiration for the myths and the gods.
Exactly. I mean, that's why you got to get there to really sort of see it. And
it's a really inspirational place. If anybody hasn't been to Greece in the chat, I would recommend going and just explore. And it's it's beautiful. The people are great. The landscape's brilliant. The food is incredible. Yeah,
you got beaches, you have archaeology, you have great people, great food. It's got really all of it. Good music, you know.
And as I will get into my next point, there's archaeology everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, which let me finish up mine because this is about that as well. Everywhere you walk in Greece, you see these terrace systems. And so the very first project I was on, that's the one photo on the right. Lynn Kavapel, PhD student with me, and this is Daniel Pullen here of FSU. We were surveying. Because not all archaeology is excavation. Sometimes you're surveying this entire port of the Mycenaean period at Korphos Kalamianos is there, as well as all these agricultural terraces. And so my good friend Dan Fallu, who we'll hear about later as well, and on the paper we've done, he's been working on a huge terracing project to understand terraces across Europe. And he in particular focuses on the Greek world. So he's studied, for example, the entire region around Mycenae, just hiking all of it, identifying all the terrace walls, trying to suss out which ones are ancient, which ones are modern, which ones are classical, which ones are Bronze Age, and then kind of mapping out as well the kind of ways in which they hold the land. And what's really interesting, one of the discoveries they had is it's really tough to tell the difference between the ancient and the modern, because they're fulfilling the same function and they're built in the same way.
Yeah, and essentially so, they are the same.
They're essentially very, very similar, and they're all aligned similarly. And so it's like, it's a really interesting thing. It makes it tough how this mishmash of ancient and modern, in a sense.
Absolutely. Which this is one of the fascinating things about the Bronze Age. There were lots of things that were sort of done for the first time, and then we haven't really moved on. We've kind of, in some ways, there are some things that are very similar today.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Very, very similar, including, as we mentioned, the draining of the landscape around Gla. Not until today was that accomplished again.
Yeah,
and
exactly. So we should probably say that the lake formed again in the Bronze Age collapse. Can we say?
Yeah, afterwards probably. But
after the Bronze Age collapse. So the lake formed again. The land was flooded, and it didn't become drained again until what, early 20th century.
Yeah, I think it was late 19th. It was either late
19th
or 20th. Yeah.
Even so, that's a long time for it, the land there to not be as good as it had been in the Bronze Age.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
It really is. And if you go there today, so much of the Greek landscape is very dry, right? But this region is extremely fertile in many ways. You sort of drive along it, and it reminds me more of like France or Germany or
it's
England,
farming
even,
country.
you know?
It's
exactly.
Really, it's not touristy at all. It's farming country up there.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that's what I got. We have engineering and geoengineering. Now we're on to lost citadels.
Well, as I was mentioning, in Greece, if you go visit, it's not great just for the beaches and the nightlife and all that and the food and the drink, but the archaeology is absolutely everywhere. So you can be driving along a highway and you look up to a hilltop and you'll think, what's that up there? And it's probably something. It's probably a hilltop sanctuary or a city or a fortress or a castle. It's almost always something. And if you go up and have a look, loads of them you can just, you've got to be careful so you don't fall over, because there's no sort of health and safety. There's no barriers or anything like that. You can fall over, but you can just go up there, and it's an incredible experience. I mean, there's so many to look for. And the thing that fascinates me is that there are so many unexcavated sites all over the place, still out there. And there are still places that have not been discovered yet. And I love thinking about these kind of things. So this is, go forward one, actually. I mean, so that is Thorikos. So that's kind of like the southern edge of Attica. And there are Tholos tombs there. There are mines nearby. And
the silver mines.
Silver mines, exactly. So, and there's kind of like, maybe it had something to do with the Mycenaean Acropolis on Athens. Maybe it didn't. But it's an interesting place, and it's beautiful as well. Absolutely beautiful. That's the sea out there. The Cycladic Islands are off in the distance. And this is where I get all airy-fairy, Flint. This is the complete opposite to you. but I could spend my entire life just exploring these sites, wandering around, looking at them. But ultimately, we need to preserve them. We need to preserve these places, because development and things like this can take their toll. Which I'm sure you know a little bit about, Flint. But illegal property development and things like this can take out some of these places. There's a lot of it, before we even find out what was going on.
And there's some teams at Thorikos now, but I think they're mostly focusing on the classical period. But there is that lovely Tholos tomb that you mentioned, which has these two horses buried in the dromos, which you can't really see it because the plexiglass on it is so fogged up. But that there are two horse skeletons there that at some point somebody needs to study. Maybe me and somebody else. I don't know. Yeah.
There's always more work that needs to be done. There's always more. There's always more funding that needs to be given as well, because the reality of the situation is there's barely any funding in Greece. It's, Greece has suffered immensely since the financial crash of 2008. And a lot of the museums have shut. A lot of them are only open on certain days because they can't afford to keep them open for other days, basically. And there's a huge amount of digging that has kind of stalled, I think. Anyway, that's what I've been led to believe. Because of lack of funding.
I think
there's international funding.
A lot of it is mandated by law. So before any construction, so I think it's stalled mainly because construction is stalled because of the lack of the downturn on the economy. Which I mean, to be really clear to everybody, this was like Greece going through the Great Depression. I lived there at the time. I lived there from 2011 through 2014.
Oh wow!
I mean,
So you were actually there at the time.
The population was swelling in Athens, and it was real bad. And businesses were just shuttered everywhere. And people were leaving, all the young people were leaving for better opportunities.
Yeah.
And so, but I do want to also push back. I see in the comment that there's nothing about modern Greece that's worth noting or appreciated. And I really want to push back on that.
Completely.
The food is amazing. The
Incredible
people are
food.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's so much. Modern Greek culture is lovely. From its poets to its music to its art. Yeah.
100%.
So
I've traveled all over the world, and Greece is top. To be honest, Japan is another amazing one, but Greece and Japan are top for me. Absolutely top, because the people are incredible, the landscape's incredible, and there's archaeology everywhere. There really is. There really is.
You know, one of the rules.
Sorry.
I was going to say, because you mentioned how you see these hills. One of the rules. So the American School of Classical Studies at Athens has this program where you travel around Greece all year, and they provide fellowships for like 11 students. And so I was one of them back in 2011. That was why I moved there. And so the rule of the American School is you see hills around you, you pick the highest one, and that's the one you climb if you want to find archaeology. Yeah. Because that's where the Greeks put their architecture, is on the highest ones.
Yeah. Always
so you definitely pick this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the Wall of Dymi, actually. So that's the place I mentioned earlier, which is not very well known, but very interesting place. You can see the well-defined walls, basically, of this citadel. Yeah. Next slide.
That's enormous. I mean, and this thick construction is so impressive. It's just like,
absolutely.
Wow.
And this is, you probably know this place. This is the Mastos Hill in the Babati Valley. So Mycenae is kind of like just over those mountains in the distance. And this is kind of, it's like behind Mycenae, essentially. And it's this valley that's just, it's like a lost world. It's full of archaeology. So you've got Tholos tombs there. You've got like a Roman spa resort, basically. I think a Hellenistic tower. And then you have this citadel, which is, I think it may be Neolithic to begin with. I'm not too sure. But it's certainly Bronze Age. And just look at that thing. No one visits. No one visits.
Everybody's at the beach.
Yeah. I had the whole valley to myself. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, but I mean, this is what I am interested in the Mycenaean world for. It's so romantic, you know. Look at that. It's like atmospheric, and it just makes you think who was living there, what was happening, what was going on, what was the relationship to Mycenae with this place. Was it originally an independent settlement? It seems like it must have been incorporated into the polity of Mycenae at some point. But yeah,
I think that's what most people assume. Yeah, certainly the people that have written on the polities. It's tough to tell. I'll present later on how we can tell at one of the sites I've worked at. But I try to remember who's published on this for here. I don't remember right now. Yeah,
this was excavated by the Swedes. I know that in the early 20th century, I think, and then possibly still now. I think today there's still maybe work going on.
Yeah, the Swedes are at Medea and Berbati, exactly. Yeah. So one of the ways things works in Greece is there's this tradition of these foreign schools. And so sort of back 100 years ago, kind of the French claimed Delphi. And they didn't claim it away from the Greeks because the Greeks worked there, but it's the French and the Greeks that work at Delphi. It's the Germans and the Greeks who work at Olympia. It's the Brits and the Greeks who work at Knossos. It's the Americans and the Greeks who work at the Athenian Agora. And so it's like, because Greece had such an issue with colonialism, they instituted these sort of fairly, harsh is the wrong word, but strict rules that made it difficult to get permits for foreigners. And they all had to go through these foreign schools. And what that meant is these schools kind of competed for claim on different sites to be able to keep doing excavation. And so each site has its own national tradition to it, if you will.
Yeah.
And
going back 130 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is when those schools were all founded, late 19th century. Yeah, exactly.
It's always interesting when you have the rivalry between all the colonial powers. It happens all over the place. But it's ultimately in Greece created some great discoveries because the Brits were trying to outdo the French, the Germans were trying to outdo the Brits, and you know.
And these days we all work together. I mean, you know, to be honest, every single project that I've worked on in Greece has people from 10, 12 different nationalities. It's not, you know, it's very multinational, interdisciplinary.
That's right.
Like
That's right. Yeah. We've moved on a little bit since those days.
Yes.
In some ways.
Yes, that too.
What other slides did I have then? So again, this is Thisbe. So this is up in not too far from Glar. It's up in near Boeotia, in the north of Greece. And this is a citadel which is above the town of Thisbe. And this place allegedly is mentioned by Homer in his catalogue of ships. So this is one of the places that, I mean, some people have tried to link it to a Homeric site, which I find pretty interesting. I mean, you're going to tell us, you're going to burst all of my dreams, Flint, and you're going to tell us that the catalogue of ships is complete nonsense and Homer never existed. And
we'll see. I have some thoughts on that. That's actually what comes up next. So you're like, but you still have another photo.
Nice. But it's it's a cool place anyway, and it's certainly a very old citadel that we don't know much about at all. And and this is another one. So this is near Treason. So this is the site associated with Theseus, who ended up going to. I mean, this is where kind of he was from. Then he ended up going back to Athens, where his father lived. Then he went to Crete. This is the myth. Then he went to Crete to fight the Minotaur in the labyrinth. But this, potentially may have had something to do with him. We can never know for sure.
You sent me these photos just like an hour ago, and I was thinking to myself, man, I don't recognize all these. I feel really bad. You're going to put me on the spot because I've been to I don't know, at least 150 sites in Greece. And thankfully, some of them I don't recognize are places I've never been.
Yeah, but this is
Which
the
also
thing.
Says something.
There are so many.
There
are so many.
It's absurd.
It's such an intricate world that's going on. All of these different polities interacting with each other. I mean, this has Tholos tombs, by the way, just next to it.
Okay.
You can't quite see it, but it's on the hill sort of just below. So, these are pretty important people who were living here. These were quite powerful people who were able to kind of build big monuments to themselves when they died. And this is a really obscure site as well.
Yeah. No,
really,
it is, and you can see how there's still a lot to excavate, and you can see how these sites are very the monumental ones, these ruins, these lost citadels. They're very visible still in the landscape. Yeah. I wish I should have brought a photo of Mycenae from before Schliemann started excavating, because the Lion Gate was visible. The Lion Gate was just right above. I don't have a photo of the Lion Gate here, but the Lion Gate was just literally right above where the soil was.
So it looks more like this in a way, that it's overgrown and there's a lot under the ground basically,
but still visible to some degree. Yeah. So on that note, I was thinking about, we think of this as the world of mythology, right? We think of the Bronze Age. This is what Homer here on the left, if he was a real person or not, is describing. He's describing Mycenae or Thisbe or Troy or etc. And I wanted us to think for a second about how myth is actually formed and created, and what archaeology and even anachronisms can tell us about that. So I'm putting you on the spot here, Pete. So before Schliemann found Troy, what did most people think about Troy?
A myth.
It was a myth. So was it real? So you think most people in the late 18th through the first half of the 19th century thought Troy was not a real place?
Depends who you speak to, but I think probably, I think probably most intellectuals would poo-poo the idea of there being a real Troy.
And so this is actually a modern anachronism. We have this idea that all these people in the 18th and 19th century thought that the discussion was, is Troy real or not as a place? Okay? And that is far from true. We've always known Troy was real because we know Alexander the Great visited there. We know that Augustus Caesar visited there. We know that Julius Caesar funded stuff. Do you know that it had a Byzantine bishop seated at Troy until the 10th or 11th century?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a functioning town well into the medieval period. And so nobody in their right mind, with the exception of a very few people, thought that Troy was not real as a place. The question was whether the Trojan War happened, whether Agamemnon was real, and where Troy was. So that was the big question. Was it here or was it there? And it was, Frank Calvert and Schliemann that sort of solved that question with their excavations.
Poor old Frank Calvert, he gets forgotten about a bit,
I know. And all the Turks, of course, too, who actually knew there was a site at Ishalik,
unnamed.
Yeah, There's one of them that's named, and I'm blanking on his name, but yeah, it's like a real issue. And we look at this stuff and we see these modern myths and we think that they're real, when in fact, no, this is our perception. Troy was always known to be real. And I want us to think about anachronisms and how myths are created. And so let's think about weapons and armor. So, all right, on the left, what do we have here, Pete? You know what it is because you also sent me a picture of it.
We've got a boar's tusk helmet.
Yes, we have a boar's tusk helmet. So what are boar's tusk helmets made from?
Boar's tusks.
Okay, what do you mean by boar's tusks? How do you get a boar's tusk?
You tell me.
No, I'm asking you. This is how we teach, right?
Yeah. Well, you
how
kill
would
a
you
boar.
go about? Okay, so where would you find a boar?
In the forest.
In the forest. So you're saying that this is a wild boar that you have to hunt?
Oh, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not a wild boar.
This is what most people think, and in fact,
I've assumed that maybe it was part of the reason why it was like an elite item, that you'd have to go fight macho in the forest and take these boar's tusks and then eventually build your item from these deceased animals. But maybe I'm completely wrong.
You're not the only one that's wrong on this. Many of my colleagues are way wrong on this.
Okay.
So I'm a zooarchaeologist. For those of you that don't know me, I study animal remains, like boar's tusks. That's like what I specialize in, and specifically from the Greek world. And so you can see these. They're mentioned in myth. We'll get to the passage in Homer that it mentions it, and you can see it. This wall painting, for example, is from Akrotiri, from Santorini. You can see these boar's tusks on it, helmets. So this is a type of helmet that we know existed at the time. It's mentioned in myth and we find it in graves. But what is it made from? So this article on the left is by Brendan Burke, who's a great archaeologist, but he gets this totally wrong. It's from like just a few years ago as well. And he says, he's talking about boar's tusk helmets. There's a whole article on boar's tusk. And it says, furthermore, representations of the boar hunt, the activity necessary for the accumulation of tusks prior to the creation of the helmet, were preserved at blah, blah, blah. This could not be more wrong. There is not a single difference between the tusks of a male domesticated boar or pig and a wild boar. They're bigger in wild boar, but that's mainly because they live longer. And so there's not a single difference. There's no reason these could not have come from domesticated pigs, the male ones, of course. They have to come from the male boar. And in fact, in Homer, if you read the Greek, this is the only passage in Homer where they mention it. Meriones gave Odysseus a bow, a quiver, and a sword, and put a cleverly made leather helmet on his head. On the inside, there was a strong lining on interwoven straps onto which the felt cap had been sewn in. The outside was cleverly adorned all around with rows of white tusks from a shiny-toothed boar, the tusks running in alternate directions in each row. Now, the Greek for the word boar is huos, or huios, and that means domesticated pig. If he was going to call it a wild boar, he'd use the word caprios, which is the word that he uses elsewhere when they're hunting wild boar. And so even Homer tells us that this is a domesticated pig. But I do want to make the point, Pete, that you're not alone. Scholars, most scholars who are not zooarchaeologists who study animals, still think that these are from wild boar hunts. And it's like, there is no reason for that. It would be much easier to, have like a Eumaeus, like that pig herd, the swine herd in the Odyssey, that is raising these kind of animals. And then the adult ones, they have large enough tusks that you can then saw and drill through to create the helmet that we know and love.
Super interesting. Hey, I enjoy being corrected. It's
and like I said, you're not alone. I was not meant to make a fool of you in any way.
Yeah, it's good. To be honest, I haven't really thought about the origins of boar tusk helmets before. So this is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's I know that they're an elite item. I assumed, okay, that's a lot of tusks.
Well, it would take a lot of
wealth.
It'd take a lot of male boar to produce that, without a doubt. But you wouldn't have to go hunt them, thankfully.
No. Yeah.
You just have to be a large landowner.
Yeah. Which is, it makes much more sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then my last little slide on this is one that I hope leads into your next section. But we love to like make fun of Brad Pitt on his cell phone at the filming of Troy as if this is anachronistic. But Homer and his representation, his description of different shields and spears and armor, they actually represent different shields, different spears from different periods. So this is evidence that this was an oral legend that was composed over hundreds of years, where sometimes if you read a section of the Iliad where they're describing a really big spear, like these on the left, where they're sort of stabbing with them, that's a Mycenaean Bronze Age spear. But when they describe multiple smaller spears that they're throwing, like the one on the right, that's an Iron Age spear. And so it's actually a different period entirely, very different kind of spear. And there's even this one passage, this image is from an article by Sue Sherritt, who just retired from the University of Sheffield. And she actually found a passage where within 2 lines, the same hero somehow switched magically from having a Bronze Age spear in his hand to an Iron Age spear in his hand. And so that shows how these poems themselves have kind of a stratigraphy to them. Their parts were composed in 1600 BC. Others were composed in 800 BC. That catalog of ships you know and love that you mentioned, there's a lot of thoughts that that was tampered with during Pisistrated Athens in the 6th century, because that's where Athens comes in. That's the one place where Athens is mentioned. And we
makes a
know
lot of sense.
Yeah, it's called the Pisistrated Recension.
But you say tampered with, so it existed before.
Oh, yeah, we know it existed before because it has these authentic descriptions of earlier material culture and earlier cultural phenomena. But
it's a combination of ages.
And that's why when you watch a movie and you see an anachronism in it, especially if it's a movie about Troy or the Iliad or something like that, that's just fine. Because it's full of anachronisms even 2,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. So we can nitpick, but
And the new one is Christopher Nolan's Odyssey.
I know, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah,
he's been getting some flack for the armor, but it's based on a myth. I mean, come on.
Based on a myth that amalgamates different kinds of armor, as we see.
I'm just happy that the film's being made. He's a great filmmaker, so that's going to be a good one.
My friend Bill Weir, he's excavating in Pylos, and he's been taking drone footage of like their ships sailing on the sea and stuff like that, because he has a drone down there, and so you can find him on Instagram if you want. He has some footage of it, and
he's been of them filming.
Because they had like a traditional trireme type ship.
Oh, brilliant!
And he does a lot of drone videos that he posts on Instagram of like the coastline in that area. So when they were filming their naval battles, he got his drone out and actually took some shots of it and stuff like that.
Oh, brilliant! So they're filming it down by Pylos then.
Yeah. A big part of it was filmed down by Pylos. Yeah, from what I heard. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go there this summer because I'm not very healthy right this second. But
I'm sorry to hear.
No, it's okay. I'm alive. That's what matters. Sorry. Now your turn to talk about war gear. This is one of my favorites.
As you can see, a boar tusk helmet and a large piece of armor. So this is a bronze cuirass, I suppose. It's like covers the entire front of the body all the way up to the neck, and it's called a panoply. And this was found at Dendra in the early 20th century by the Swedes, which is kind of like it's a cemetery right next to the citadel of Medea. And look at the thing, it's crazy. And I believe anyway, up until this point, I think it was found in the 1950s or something, nothing like this had been found before. So it's kind of like this just appeared out of nowhere. And that's the sort of thing you can find if you're doing archaeology. No one expected to find this. This just appears in one of the graves. And look at the thing. And it kind of opens up a whole realm of thinking about what combat was like with guys dressed up like this. It's got to be it seems like it would be quite hard to wear and quite hard to fight in, but maybe I'm completely wrong. If you're a big buff Bronze Age guy, maybe it's easy.
Wait, we were speaking about Christopher Nolan.
Oh,
I saw this post at some point.
Oh, I think I saw this as well. Yeah,
where people are like, authentic. Why do they not do the authentic? And it's like, well, because this would look silly to people in today's world.
It would look silly to people, yeah. But back then, this was this, well, maybe, I don't know. I'm assuming that this was quite an expensive piece of kit. So this was like, this was what you'd want. You'd want this. You'd want to look like this.
There's some funny scenes of people running in them. It's hilarious on YouTube.
Yes, exactly. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think little fragments of other panoplies have been found as well. So it's kind of like, it's not an isolated piece.
No, not at all.
These were kind of all over the place.
I think before too, but we didn't know what it all looked like until the Dendro one had been found.
Yeah. So it had been kind of like hypothesized before what the full piece would look like. But then, and it makes me think: was this common, or is this? I mean, it seems like it's got to be quite rare. But imagine an entire warband protecting a king, wearing this armor. Crazy.
Badass. It's like a big football linebacker,
so
you know,
cool.
like
so cool. It's like a tank. It's a tank of the Bronze Age world.
That's such a great comparison. It really is. Yeah.
I mean, you could probably, I mean, we've got to think this is like, okay, Achilles wearing this thing. And it makes me think though, because Achilles, obviously he's only got his heel that he can be harmed in. And you've only got the legs poking out of this thing. So,
and you can imagine how swift he would be.
Swift-footed. Yeah. And then, obviously to go along with the armor, you've got the shields, which Flint mentioned, which we've got the swords.
Oh wait, yeah.
So there's loads of swords from Mycenaean world all over the place, and they're decorated with these incredible ornate gold patterns. Some of them have jewels on them. There's one that I saw in the Olympia Museum that has a crystal pommel on the sword, and it's bling. Like there's like kind of similar to other areas of history, like the Anglo-Saxon era, and after the Romans, a similar kind of thing happens where people have all these intricate. They're showing off their glittering armor and their wealth. And actually, I find it really interesting that like this was important to these people. They deemed this to be very important, and they put a lot of time and energy into it. This is an artist who has made this.
Definitely, this is not necessarily something that would be just functional.
No,
this is about displaying your wealth. And even this, I mean, a lot of people have argued about these things, like what are these swords even used? Were they just for display? Even some of the large fortifications, if we go all the way back to I was going to bring this up, the Dima one, where did it go? There it is.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Look at how massive this wall is. And so, some of the arguments are that maybe it's not even just for defense, but it's actually just meant to look super fucking impressive.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly. And you find that all over, on a bit of a tangent, but at Hattusha in the Hittite Empire, the Hittite capital, from one side you approach Hattusha, it looks completely normal. From the other side, I think possibly it's approaching from the south, it looks insane. It's like the way that it's been built, these huge defenses basically. So for somebody approaching, it would be absolutely incredible. It would be I'm not sure if that is the right side.
I've never been to Hattusha, so I don't know.
This is part of the reconstructed wall.
Yeah.
But it's about display. It's about showing off. It's showing off your power. And this is kind of similar to hill forts, Iron Age hill forts in Britain as well. A lot of them are like, it's more about being seen. It's like, look at me. Look at how powerful I am. It's not necessarily, they're not actually the greatest defensive locations often.
Yeah, it's a lot of that, especially choosing high slopes and things like that. It's about visibility.
Yeah, it's visibility, and it's projecting
and
your
even
strength.
This kind of armor. Think about, you were saying it's for the elites. Of course, think about how much bronze that is. That is a massive amount of bronze. You need to get your tin from like Afghanistan or Cornwall. You have to get your copper from like Cyprus or something like that. So to get that much bronze and that many boar's tusks, that shows your wealth. That's like driving a Lamborghini or something like that.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely, that's right. And imagine kitting out a whole warband with all that gear as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's only going to be a few polities that can do that.
So I got my next one to line up well.
Let's go.
And this is where you're going to enjoy this, because you asked me about my time excavating the Griffin Warrior tombs. So this is going to be about what I learned from excavating.
I suppose, does everybody know about the Griffin Warrior tombs, do you think?
We'll get there in a sec.
Yeah.
We'll get there in a sec about what it is. But I want to start off with a question for you, Pete. Like, you can tell I'm a teacher. I'm sorry. This is just how I am. I did it to Joe Rogan even, like it's what you do when you teach. So why do you think the Mycenaeans buried so much wealth in their tombs? These gold masks, these jewelry, these arms and armor.
Again, I'll go for an airy-fairy answer. I will say so they could be accompanied by a vast amount of wealth to the next world, to the next life, to ease their passing to the next world, to the afterlife.
Yeah, that's oftentimes what we tell students, particularly like up to high school level. Once you start getting no, but that's what the public thinks, right? That's what
you can tell I
think
studied history and not archaeology.
No worries, come on. This
I'm a historian by training.
Not in any way meant as an insult, Pete. Please, not in the least. You do an amazing job on your channel. I would not have you on if you were not an excellent historian and archaeology communicator. Seriously.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am not an archaeologist. I'm an archaeology communicator. That's an important distinction to make. My training was history.
If I thought you did a bad job communicating, you would not be here. Let's be really clear. Like, this shows that I think you do an amazing job, which you do. You have far more subscribers than me, but if you don't subscribe to Pete already at History Time, go check him out because he does amazing stuff. And so this is one of the big questions: why so much wealth in tombs? And so what I want you to think about, though, is who's putting that wealth in these tombs?
I think I know what you're going to say as well, because this is, again, we're talking about, it's a display of wealth. We're going to talk about funerary rituals during the funeral event, because this is also similar to, just to bring it back to kind of like 6th century AD Europe, Scandinavia, during the Vendel period and this kind of thing, because it's kind of similar. There's interesting similarities. It's like showing off wealth by the ruling dynasty to their followers and subjects.
And it's oftentimes, you could think of it as a claim to succession as well. Because, you as the son or the heir or the whatever, the daughter, it doesn't matter who it is that's succeeding. You're partly cementing that by showing off your wealth that you've inherited. Yes. And you're having a big feast. And maybe the nobles that are going to have to swear loyalty to you are also going to deposit stuff in the tombs as a little signet, a little token of appreciation. So like in this Griffin Warrior tomb, or in all these other tombs, these deep shaft graves, we get sort of these collections of things, right? In the Griffin Warrior tomb, it was little like signet rings, like amulets. And this one is these little octopuses in gold leaf and stuff like that. And there's been a lot of work to try to count this stuff and think about people gifting this during the funeral as part of a ritual, right? And so I truly came to appreciate this when I excavated this tomb. This is the tomb of the Griffin Warrior. It's at the Palace of Nestor at Pylos. This right here in the middle is Professor Sherry Stocker. She was the director of one of the co-directors of the project. I was the field director at the time. I'm not in the photo, but this is Allie Fields. She was the trench supervisor. And this is Denitsa Nanova and Yonita Martini. Yoni is my wife and our graphic designer and video editor here. She's also an archaeologist. And so they're the digital mapping experts for the project. And so we discovered this totally by chance, sort of, as we'll see, back in 2015, almost 10 years ago to the day. We discovered this tomb. And we were trying to get land nearby, but it was held up in court. The farmer had held it up in court. It was going to be expropriated by the Greek government for excavation, but it was held up. And, like you hear about this rumors about Göbekli Tepe and planting olive trees and shit like that by farmers. Farmers want to make sure they get compensated before they sell their land to the government for it to become archaeological land. And so this was sort of why we had a delay. So we had to put trenches in kind of in this olive grove in the middle of nowhere. And so I had set up the team to just kind of start using rakes and stuff like that, just to sort of rake off all the brush so we could decide where to put our trenches, right? And so this trench right here, within the very first day, we found these 2 stones that made a corner. And we said, oh, we're going to put a trench there. Let's see what's there. And that's how we found the Griffin Warrior tomb. And that's what this ended up becoming. And this was the most wealthiest tomb that's been discovered in Greece in, I think, over 100 years since the shaft graves at Mycenae were excavated. And so maybe a little less than 100 years is what I should be saying.
It's certainly a long time.
Yeah, certainly a long time. And it was just a crazy experience. As we went down, I had to actually excavate all the soil all the way down to about this level. And there's this giant stone here that was either sitting on top, though I think it was a headstone that was standing up, like those at Mycenae that have carvings on them that had weathered away and fallen in. But once we got to the bottom, my pickaxe actually broke off a piece of bronze off this giant spouted vessel. This vessel, you can't tell from the size. It looks little. It's actually like this big around, right? It's an enormous spotted vessel. And as you might be able to tell, at this point, as we got down, there ended up becoming more bronze and gold and silver and jewelry than there was soil. So we had to completely stop excavating, and it was excavated almost entirely by conservators to be able to preserve all the material as we were excavating it. And so we just sort of stood there and cataloged and mapped it, because it was mostly conservation as excavation, so that the material wouldn't just fall apart as we uncovered it. It actually took I think a year and a half for them to finish. I had to leave the project because I had to finish my PhD. I was actually moving back to the US around that time from living in Greece. So I was there for the first half of the excavation, but not the second half. And so it was just filled with, this is a bronze mirror here, an ivory comb, a ton of precious metals and gems and gold and stuff like that. This is the famous warrior agate. This is one of the many, I think there's 100 something or many dozen seal stones from it. And this is one, what do you think it is? We were talking about this beforehand.
Can you zoom in at all?
Yeah, I can zoom in.
Because there's some amazing details on here. Well, it's a depiction of 2 warriors, basically. Mm-hmm. Some people suggest that it could be mythological scene. But essentially, it's like, you can actually see some of the cool armor that he's got on as well, which is interesting, because that's not a boar's tusk helmet, is it?
He's got like a metal helmet, yeah, with a big crest.
But the shield is kind of similar to shields that are found archaeologically, I suppose. And there's a dead guy underneath them, so it's like it's a battle to the death. But I mean, I think the guy doing the stabbing looks a bit Minoan. So if you go to Crete, there's a lot of depictions of these sort of like youthful, shredded guys with long hair, and it sort of looks a bit like that. So I don't know. I mean, it looks potentially, but it's a depiction of a battle in Crete, a Mycenaean warrior fighting a Cretan. But
yeah, or I mean, as we were saying, I mean, like Sherry and Jack, the 2 lead excavators, they're convinced this is a mythical scene. Like Achilles fighting Hector or something like that. Which it could be. We don't know.
Because we should say that there are very similar scenes that were in the shaft graves, I think, at Mycenae.
Yes, there's definitely similar scenes, and just like at this early period, this is from like 1600, 1500 BC, something like that. At this early period, a lot of Mycenaean artwork is influenced by Minoan. There's probably Minoan craftspeople and artists that are migrating into Mycenae and moving around and doing artistry, or potentially this was imported. There's even some people that think that the person who was buried in this tomb was from Crete, because there's so many kind of Minoan influences in the art in this tomb. And that's a big debate, huge
I think he
debate.
certainly had something to do with Crete, whether it was Cretans or he'd gone to Crete and come back or something like this.
Yeah. Or just traded with it. Yeah,
or just traded.
And which makes sense with Pylos being kind of near the southwest coast. It's not that far to travel to Crete from there.
No, it's not.
Yeah. And somebody asked, and this was, I think, the key point to get across is, how does it feel digging up actual gold treasures, even though you don't get to keep any of it? It must have felt so cool. I've been on dozens of excavations, guys. I've never excavated anything like this. This felt like I was out of the 19th century, like I was Howard Carter or Schliemann or Indiana Jones, right? But what it gave me an appreciation for because it was so fleeting, right? This was just, I was just there for a few months and then I was gone, was that event of being exposed to so much wealth and then it going away, right? And that's the funerary ritual. Everybody, probably the heir or the family, is presenting most of the wealth, but it's sort of, you see it, you see it, you see it, and then you cover it over. And it's just this ritual that leaves a lasting impression of power and hierarchy and stuff like that on the participants in this kind of funerary ritual. And so we call this conspicuous consumption. That's the fancy anthropological term, where you think of it like this: when you throw a huge party and like a wedding, like a super lavish wedding where, like, you know, the family is spending, I don't know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of bucks on a wedding. And it's like, it's all for one event, for one ritual. That's what this is comparable to, if you think of it like that. It's like spending a ton of money to be able to show you're showing off, right? You're displaying that power and that wealth and things like that. And so that's probably one of the leading thoughts on why people bury so much wealth, is its conspicuous consumption. You are destroying that wealth in a sense by burying it, but it serves that function by displaying your power and your wealth and things like that, right?
I'm totally with you now, Flint. And it's interesting because, just to go back to Scandinavia in the early Middle Ages, it's very similar. There's a very similar thing going on. So there'll be a big, I mean, like Beowulf's funeral, for example, in the sagas. The evidence that's kind of similar to that has been found archaeologically as well. And interestingly, there's even, I was reading the other day that there's an idea that some of these tombs may have been seen as like kind of a bank for the ruling dynasty. So in hard times, they might dig in and take some of the stuff back. So they may have been looting their own tombs, essentially. So
there's a lot of tomb looting going on. We
not to mention the other
with
people
Egypt,
looting
for example,
the tombs.
with pyramids and stuff like that.
They're all looted.
Yeah, that's why the Tholos tombs are all looted. So you go to Mycenaean and you see, like, you know, the treasury of Atreus and the treasury of Clytemnestra and stuff like that. They were all completely empty by the time Ali Pasha sort of went and excavated out some of it, and different early archaeologists in the late 19th century, and they're almost all completely empty because they were so visible in the landscape. It's only these kind of shaft graves that are dug so deep that were undisturbed, that were available for archaeologists to find. And stuff so like this.
I always think, what would have been in the treasury of Atreus? What marvels would have been in there? Like what would have been in, you know, Ramesses II's tomb in Egypt? These foremost kings and pharaohs, what would they have been buried with? Because we only have the evidence from relatively obscure sort of figures, really, sometimes. Maybe not with the Tomb of the Griffin Warrior.
Well, I think it's been reported already. It was in the New York Times. The same team that found the Griffin Warrior tomb, I'm no longer with that team, but I have other projects I work on. But they've also found some tholoi that were unlooted. So we're soon going to see some examples of that in more detail. There is a New York Times article on it, but I don't think it's been presented in full detail. I don't even know the full details of it.
Do you know where they have
right nearby in the same area? The entire area is basically the cemetery, the Royal Cemetery for Pylos. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Just totally cool. There was one other shaft grave excavated at Pylos by Carl Blagan, and that was up near the palace, but that was fully looted in antiquity. So yeah. But yeah, so it's excavating this, it gave me that appreciation for the event, that ritual of burying and destroying all this wealth, in a sense, and that conspicuous consumption. You really feel it when you're around it, because it's like, whoa, this is just so much stuff, right? There's like,
so much there.
Jeepers.
Again, if all you need to do is go to the National Museum of Archaeology in Athens and go into the Mycenaeans room, and it's just full of gold and bling and silver and just incredible items, and you get a little sense of what it would have been like, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And in particular, in the National Museum in Athens, they have a whole setup for all the stuff from the shaft graves at Mycenaean and stuff like that. Hey, thanks so much, Southern Slavery Uncovered. I know you sent me an email. I'll get back to you. Okay, let's see. And then just some more examples of that kind of wealth. In this tomb were 4 gold signet rings, and they all have parallels, like you mentioned, to Crete. So like bull leaping ring with a parallel to like this bull leaping ring from Arcanis on Crete, or these kind of priestesses around an altar. And over here you have a similar sort of seal ring from Isopatra on Crete. And on that note, I want to make a clear point, Carl, that archaeology is not just grave robbing with field notes. Archaeology is finding these kind of patterns and testing your hypotheses, which is what we can do when we have large sets of evidence. And we can find these patterns between the mainland and Crete, for example, because we are scientists who test these hypotheses. And so here I am. This is just photographic proof that I was in there excavating this tomb. So that's my story about excavating the Griffin Warrior tomb. I got to do a video on it at some point, and that leads in really well to number 3.
Okay, so this is, I mean, this follows on from what Flint was saying. Some of the artwork that the Mycenaeans were capable of is it's quite extraordinary. I mean, look at this. Look at it. It's really interesting, and you can kind of see a lot of iconography in some of the art as well. You can see a lot of kind of what they chose to depict about their world. Lots of nature, lots of animals, lots of like flowers and spirals and things like this, and it's often very colourful as well. So there's an idea of like, you look at the ruins and the only thing that's left is the stones, but you got to think there would have been like render on it and colour, and yeah, it's a very colourful world, beautiful world. They liked beauty. They were into the finer things, and yeah, it's a very intricate piece. I mean, this is what, I'm not sure how old this one is, but I'm not gonna lie, I got this off Google about half an hour before we started our conversation. But I just typed in.
I mean, I guess
art.
something like 1600, 1500, I think, is when this Niello, Dan Falou, who I mentioned, he did that terrace project at Mycenae. He's in the chat. He mentions Niello, which is this gold on bronze type technique. Yeah.
And this is just one piece. You know, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces, all different styles. And I mean, there's artists all over the Greek world at this point, all having a go at all this, making this incredible stuff. And yeah, I love looking at ancient art and see. So this is the next piece. This is the I believe this is the Vaffio cup, which again is like, look, it's almost like naturalistic art. It's really, really good. If you could zoom in, Flint. Maybe.
Yeah, I can definitely zoom in. Look at this. These muscles and look at
the features are just amazing. And this is, I think, a similar time to the Tomb of the Griffin Warrior.
Yes,
like
this would be
1500 roundabout. So it's quite early as well. This is not like late Mycenaean. And again, this may have originated on Crete, but it just shows the world that they were part of, you know. And some of this artwork, you can get a little bit of a, maybe you're not gonna like this, but I know some people try and find mythological scenes, and they try and compare various things to try and come up with like a link to the later gods and goddesses and things.
There's nothing wrong with doing that. You know, I'm an archaeological scientist, so I don't do that kind of stuff. But I think that's like, as I mentioned earlier, these kind of oral stories, we know they were around since at least 1600 or so. And so that means they were around at this time. It's just difficult to be sure when you're speculating on that kind of stuff. But here's a fun speculation for you. You ever watch Game of Thrones?
Please go ahead. Oh, yeah.
You ever watch? Yeah. So here's a cup that Tyrion drinks out of compared to the Vaffio cup. And so we can see how art today imitates art in the past, where it's the same kind of metallic sort of setup. You can see the same kind of handle even. The producers of Game of Thrones were very clearly inspired by the Vaffio cups. Yeah.
Now, is Tyrion in Essos at this point?
Yeah, I think that's where it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And me and my friends all exploded when we saw it.
Very cool. Very cool. But yeah, it's a very colourful world. It's a very artistic world, and you can learn a lot about it by just going and looking at the artwork that they made. A surprising amount. And this is it again. This, I think this is actually a Mycenaean piece, but it sort of echoes earlier Cretan styles, like earlier kind of Cretan octopi, which they were kind of
Octopodes.
There you go.
And the Greek plural will be octopodes.
nice. That's a similar word, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these things are everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. Let's go next slide. What else have I can't remember what I put on. And of course, the death mask of Agamemnon, which was hundreds of years separated from Agamemnon if he had lived. But these death masks are really interesting, and they're kind of unique as well.
They are. They're really crazy.
In the shaft graves of Mycenae. They're quite early as well. They're like 1600 BC.
Yeah, around then.
Thereabouts. 15, 16, thereabouts. So these are like, and some people say it may be a hoax by Schliemann, but I don't know. It looks pretty real to me. What do you think about that? Do you think it's a hoax or?
Oh no, we have others. No. I had an image of one earlier.
Because there's like 6 or 7. But
yeah,
the idea is that
like this is my favorite. This guy's like crazy. This big fat dude.
He looks like a king. He looks like a king.
Yeah. He looks like a king, exactly. So I don't think that Schliemann made these up. There'd be no reason.
I don't think he did. Yeah. But basically, I think it's because the mustache looks a bit suspect for some people. They think that looks too much like a Victorian mustache. But I just think it's a really good piece of art, to be honest. But I mean, it's like, is it an actual death mask? Was the gold poured on the face? And then hammered? What do you think?
That I don't know. I'm sure people have studied this, but I've not read on it, so I'm not sure. But you can see if we go back to the Vaffio cup, I mean, come on, the same kind of similar attention to detail and intricacies. We just saw it on that agate. Yeah. So to think that this is too detailed for it to be real, and I'd guess with these ears don't look real. Yeah. They look meaning I don't think it was poured on with those ears.
Yeah. And this one doesn't look like it doesn't look like it's a real face. Some of the other ones look like they're kind of more, they're a bit weirder, and their features are a bit odd. It's like, why would somebody choose to be depicted like that?
Yeah. There's a whole list of them.
And then we can see depiction of a chariot.
I got some of them. We can see a range of them if we're interested.
There are loads of them.
There's just a bunch of them from Mycenae, and they're all really cool. There wasn't one in the Tomb of the Griffin Warrior, unfortunately.
No. They've only been found at Mycenae so far.
Yeah, but they're very cool.
It makes you think, though, would other places have been making them as well? So would Pylos have them at some point, and then they've been lost? But
maybe there's definitely differences though between these different polities. And what
for sure.
Doing. So
yeah. They're all different cultures essentially. Yeah, interesting. And so we've got another depiction there, and there's a lot of wall paintings as well, which is another cool thing. So there's a lot of them all over the place, and I don't actually know where this one's from. It could be from, I know there's lots of Tiryns, there's lots at Thebes and lots at Mycenae and other places too. Yeah, Pylos has a lot as well.
Yeah,
and you've got to imagine the royal court, let's say, with these things all over the walls. But even maybe not just the royal court, because private homes, for example, at Akrotiri, it's not quite Mycenaean. It's a little bit earlier, but private homes were covered in all of this artistic decoration. So, yeah, we're not unique in having like paintings.
No, not at all. No, we're copying people from the last thousands of years.
Pretty much,
and you're right. There's a ton of them.
And it just makes me think, like, are they depicting family members? Is this like, oh, we've got Granny and Grandad on the wall from 75 years ago or something? Because you don't do these things for no reason. There's a purpose and a meaning that goes into these pieces. But yeah, I'm always thinking about the philosophical implications of what we're looking at.
That's fine. Yeah, you're a historian. You should.
Exactly. I couldn't do 1,000 words on one tiny little piece of scrap.
What's your thoughts on this question that just showed up in the chat?
What we got?
Did the Vikings take any inspiration from the Mycenaeans? Some artifacts seem to reflect influences from that culture. You were even mentioning similarities in kind of burial style and stuff like that. Yeah.
I just think it's a coincidence. I don't think there's direct inspiration because they wouldn't have been able to see any of their items, and they're very far away from each other in time and geography. So I think it's just, maybe there's just certain, not to go too, I don't know, but like Indo-European cultures. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's also an example maybe of convergent evolution in a sense, where different cultures solve similar problems in similar ways, not because they're taking inspiration from one another, but because, this is a way that works, right?
That's right. These things just reappear. And I mean, there were certainly both cultures that put a lot of emphasis on like martial being. So like there were warrior cultures, but they were both cultures that appreciated the finer things as well. Both pre-Christian cultures.
Yeah.
They were interested in war and beauty.
And inheritance and those kind of things all make sense.
Exactly. They were unequal societies where you would have haves and have-nots, and the haves wanted the finer things to show off their power.
Yeah. No, I fully agree.
I think one more slide, I think.
Yeah.
So this is the treasury of Minos or Komnenos. And just to briefly show, if you zoom in on the ceiling, there's some really cool artwork there. So it's just this is an idea of what some of the tombs would have looked like on the inside.
Yeah. And these kind of things, there would have been going in and out over generations, perhaps, so they'd be visible for each of these rituals.
That's right.
If that makes any sense.
Possibly to consult the ancestors or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even we'll talk in a second.
Go and ask great granddad for advice.
Or even, a few hundred years later, where you sort of claim the land and you say these were my ancestors, whether they were or not doesn't matter. Exactly.
We'll get to that in my next point.
Exactly. That's what we're getting towards. This tomb at Orchomenos is just amazing.
Very, very cool.
Let's think of the end of this era now, and then we'll think a little bit about its echo. And so one way we can think about the Mycenaeans is that this was an age of sheep. It was not just an age of bronze. The Mycenaeans were really into sheep. And I'm not joking. Our linear B tablets, the written text that we have, which are basically receipts of goods in and out, everywhere we have linear B tablets, they talk about wool. They talk about textile manufacture, and they have lots of sheep. Like this one linear B tablet mentions 10,000 sheep on that one tablet. The sheep were one of the big ways of showing their wealth. And in fact, like Eric Klein and others that have studied trade and stuff like that, they think that there's depictions of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans maybe on Egyptian tomb paintings carrying textiles as offerings, because their textiles were a big product for the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. And when I'm talking about a lot, I think at Mycenaean Knossos, because most people think the last phase of Knossos, at least the last Bronze Age phase, was when it was ruled by Mycenaeans. And that's when Linear B, the script of the Mycenaeans, shows up there. There's something like 100,000 sheep that are mentioned on these tablets. So we're talking about the era of sheep. So I'm going to put you on the spot again, Pete, because I'm really into animals and I got to do a little bit of my, show and tell teaching stuff. So if besides these kind of textual sources for all these sheep and whatnot, sometimes, our texts don't always relate to who we really are. You look at celebrities on Instagram and you look at them in real life, they might be two very different people. So if we're going to test this kind of thing, do these texts truly represent that these are sheep people interested in wool? What would someone like me as an animal bone person be looking for to test this hypothesis?
A lot of bones.
A lot of bones from what kind of animal?
From sheep.
Yes. Okay. That's number one. And we have that. So if we look at this is all the late Bronze Age sites across the Aegean world in modern Greece. And the most common animal found at almost all of them is sheep. Some of them, they were studied early on, so they didn't distinguish the sheep from the goat bones, because that's really difficult to do. But the vast majority, even light green, by the way, is your sheep. This all adds up to 100%. And I put at the top a little emoji of the most common animal at each of these. So sheep are the most common animal at almost every single Mycenaean site where we have a good collection of animal bones, meaning hundreds, if not thousands, of identifiable specimens. Most of these have thousands. Okay, next question for you. You can raise sheep for a lot of different things, right? So you could raise them for meat, you could raise them for milk, you could raise them for wool. So I'm going to play a game with you, Pete. And I do this all the time. It's one of my favorite games. So let's not start with sheep. Let's start with goats. Okay, so let's say you are a goat herder on Crete, and the price of feta cheese is just through the roof because everybody wants feta cheese. What kind of goats are you going to have in terms of ages and sexes?
Oh, you want mostly female goats.
Mm-hmm.
You want young female goats. Maybe youngish.
Of birth rearing age, because they give milk when they give birth. And you only need a few adult males for breeding because there's the lucky few. But the problem is they give birth 50-50 to male, female. So what do you do with the males?
Eat them.
At what age? What do male goats eat? What do male goats eat?
Grass.
What do baby male goats eat?
Milk.
What do you want?
You want the milk.
Yeah, so you're going to slaughter them very, very, very young.
Immediately, basically.
Yeah. So if you have a mortality profile of sort of a dairy population, you see all the males slaughtered really, really young.
So literally born and then...
Yeah. Maybe a couple months
Brutal.
to give them a little more weight, but yeah, very, very young.
Yeah.
So, okay, now let's play a different game. Now you want to maximize your wool, so you have a bunch of sheep. What kind of sheep do you want in terms of ages and sexes?
So you broke up there.
Okay, so now you want to get wool. All you care about is wool because you're textiles. Sorry, is my audio acting up?
No, it was the internet, but it's back now.
Okay, good. So all you care about is wool because textile is your sort of one of your major products that you export. It's worth a lot. Wool sweaters are just the rage right now. So all you want is wool. So what ages and sexes of sheep do you want?
I'm
giving you a clue.
I think I don't know.
Well, who has more hair on their body with humans, males or females?
So males.
Okay, same thing with sheep.
But I'm thinking in Wales and places like this, it's always the female sheep, and they're the ones.
Well, that's because you're not focusing on wool. Seriously, just like with humans, males have more and fluffier wool. Now, have you ever been to the beach?
Have I? No.
You've been to the beach.
No,
You've never been to the beach. Not in all your time at Greece.
Of course I have.
Okay.
Of course I have.
So who has more hair on their backs, young men or old men?
Old men.
Same thing with the fucking sheep.
Wow. Okay. So you want old male sheep and young female goats.
If you're going for dairy or wool, if you're going for meat, it's totally different. It's sort of in the middle. You want prime age animals.
But if you're a merchant, you're trying to get as rich as possible.
Yes.
That's what you want.
If you're trying to optimize, and then there's one other thing that you can do to make your sheep woolier. You can castrate the male sheep and turn them into wethers.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so we actually know that these linear B tablets, for example, where they're mentioning 10,000 sheep, they're not mentioning 10,000 sheep. They're mentioning 10,000 male castrated sheep.
Wow.
So this is a wool herd. So Paul Halstead retired recently from Sheffield. He studied these and published on them. And what that even tells you is if we have 100,000 male castrated sheep mentioned in these linear B tablets, they're coming from an even larger set of herds that include breeding stock and young and stuff like that, and all the females that you need to be able to keep the herd sustainable. So we're talking huge numbers of sheep. And the cool thing is we can test this not just from the numbers of species, but we can test it with ages and sexes. So if we go to Nicoria, which you made you made an excellent documentary on. Actually, before I go there, let me pop that link in the chat so that people go there really quickly. So
you
Nicoria,
should visit Nicoria as well because it doesn't get many visitors.
Beautiful.
It's a great
Nicoria
place.
is beautiful, And here we go. What happened to the lost Mycenaean palace of Nicoria? This is one of Pete's better videos. They're all great, but I love it because this was what my PhD was on, so I'm
Special
biased.
place in your heart.
Video on Nicoria. Yeah, I spent I don't know how many years studying. There's tens of thousands of bones from this site. So this is what it looks like. It has all this really great construction there. We mentioned Dan Falou. He's in the chat. He published this paper with me. He was my co-author. And Nicoria is over here. Here's Pylos. We've been talking a lot about the Palace of Nestor at Pylos. At some point in the late Bronze Age, late Helladic III, Nicoria became part of the polity that was controlled out of that palace. And we can track that control through the animals. So we see the change from pigs being the most common species to sheep being the most common species right in that phase, right? So that tracks really well. And then if you age the teeth, so just like with humans, you can age teeth when they come in, for example, and the wear on them, so we can see how old the sheep were when they were slaughtered. They actually get older at that time. So what we see here is at birth, 100% of the herd is alive. And by a year, most of them are still alive. And then over time, more and more of the herd is dying, right? And in the LH1 and 2 period, before Pylos took over, this is the line. They're dying off in sort of that prime age category for meat. When the palace took over, they start being slaughtered at an older age, at 4 or 5 years old. And so this, to me, is good evidence that they're changing their economy to suit what the people at the palace wanted, which was wool. And we have all these linear B tablets from the Palace of Nestor at Pylos. When it was burned down, they solidified, and they talk about all the textiles that they produced. And so this is one of the things that we can test. And now we can think about what happens with the fall of the Bronze Age, though. And so the first people that studied these bones, it was this paleontologist named Robert Sloan. He noticed that there were all these cattle that show up in the early Iron Age. And so he developed this idea that if we read Homeric myths, there's all this Homeric meat eating. They're eating all these cows. This is the sign of a more pastoral society that takes place at the end of the Bronze Age. As these palaces collapse, people become sort of cowboys. He actually calls them gauchos in his publications. And so they sort of talk about these pastoralists living at Nicoria in the early Iron Age, and they did cattle raids and cowboy type stuff and whatnot. Now this is actually, by the time I went and studied it, this was on the wane as the idea, because we did studies of isotopes in human teeth, and we realized that they're actually eating less animal protein at this time. So what's going on here? What actually is going on is there's climate change at this time. There's a sharp drought that happens starting in the sort of 14th century, and it persists for several hundred years. And the climate gets extremely dry. I've talked about it with Eric Klein and Paul Cooper on this channel before, and we can see this showing up. Like Daniel Kaniewski is the first person to publish on it, and then Erica Weiberg and Martin Finet have done. They're Swedes, by the way. We've been talking about a lot of Swedish people, and I've co-authored with them. They're really great climatologists and archaeologists. And what changes is not that everything becomes cattle. Instead, you can see Nicoria here. Here's cattle. Instead, it mostly becomes goats, but mostly in the eastern part of the mainland and the eastern part of Crete. And the reason why, this is what me and Martin Finet worked out, is he worked out the precipitation in these different areas. And if you've ever been to Greece, there's these mountains that run down the middle. And the western part of Greece gets twice as much rainfall as the eastern part. So in a period where it gets much drier, the drier parts of Greece, the people have to adapt with the food that they produce, and they shift from sheep to goats, which are hardier in a kind of drier climate. And so that's the kind of shift that we see as people adapt to the end of the Bronze Age, is they change their ways of life. They change the kind of animals they produce, the kinds of crops that they grow. There's a lot more barley, for example, which is more drought resistant in comparison to wheat. And so we can start to see these kind of changes, and when this shows up in the pollen records, the animal bone records, the archaeobotanical records and whatnot. And that's the kind of shift that happens, and it goes from the sheep age to the goat age. So I have some fun photos of some goats in Greece, because there's just so many awesome goats. But it's only in eastern Greece where it's mostly goats, because that's where it's very, very dry. So yeah, so now you can tell us about this echo that occurs of the Bronze Age. You can take us home, Pete.
Wow, Flint, that was really interesting.
Yeah, if you have questions, I can answer some questions if you want me to.
So go back a couple of slides.
Yeah. Which one?
Go forward one.
To the climate change, yeah.
One more. No, go forward one more.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
What I'm showing here is all the most this is the most common. I can send you a PDF. Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
This is the most common animal at each site. This is in the early Iron Age. I have in the paper. I'd have to find the paper, but I have a map also for the Bronze Age where it's mostly sheep all over. And you can see a number of these. Yeah.
Still some pigs down in the sort of Pylos area.
Yeah. So this
pigs
is
and cattle down there.
This cattle is that one at Nicoria. And that's an outlier. These both are outliers for two reasons. So one, the cattle at Nicoria, I can send you that paper as well that I published with Dan.
Please do.
The reason why there's more cattle at Nicoria is because the soil is acidic in the upper layers. And the Iron Age layers are above the Bronze Age layers. And it's basically rainfall creates this acidic soil there. And the smaller bones disappear. They get chewed up by the acidity of the soil, and cattle bones survive better. And we tested this. There's one area of the site where there's no Iron Age over the Bronze Age. And in that area, there's more cattle even in the Bronze Age because it's affected by the acidity of the soil. And so that's an outlier. This pig one, which is at Mycenaean, it's a famous classical site, but there's some Bronze Age layers there. I don't know what the updated study of this. This study's from like the 70s. And it's tough to trust studies from the 70s. So I was a student of Paul Halstead. I mentioned him earlier. One of his more recent students has restudied this material. It's not published yet, as well as new material from the city. And so I'm not sure if this pig here is going to hold up to that future study. We'll see in a few years, I imagine, when it gets published. It's a PhD student, a Greek PhD student who's studying it. So we'll see whether that pig sticks around. But yeah, and then on Crete, you can see this sharp divide. And we have a table where we publish all the Bronze Age sites and stuff as well, to kind of show that this divide between East and West. Yeah. I will say at Nicoria, sheep stay more common than goats. Even though cattle are the most common due to the acidity of the soil, sheep are still more common than goats.
Yeah.
That I do know. Yeah.
Super interesting. So you must be one of the world's leading experts on animal bones in the Peloponnese in the Bronze Age.
Yeah, I'm one of the leading experts. There's very few of us that do animal bones in Greece.
It's good to have a niche.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like maybe, if you include students, there's maybe 10 of us that do this. If you don't include students, there's about 5 of us. And we're all very friendly. We all somebody on Twitter was like, man, Flint's colleagues, because I'm hated by all the Graham Hancock fans. They made up some shit about how like my colleagues and me got into some dispute over animal bones, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I co-author and like collaborate with these people. We're like in conferences together and workshops all the time. Like they trained me. Like we get along very well. Like there's more animal bones to be studied than there are specialists to study them in the Greek world. So there's the opposite of competition because we all have plentiful material to study, and we mostly just want to work together to figure out the past, and we want to publish together to amplify each other and what we're doing. Yeah.
What would there to be gained from falling out?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some fields of archaeology where there is competition, like to study stuff like gold in tombs. There's a lot more competition for that than there is from animal bones from the Greek world. Yeah.
But we all want to just find the information. We all want to just get to the details and find out what was really going on.
I agree with you there. Yeah, 100%.
Right. Go to my pitiful last point.
No, this is an important one. This is a key one.
So let's skip forward a couple of slides because I think I'm going to order this in a different way. Let's go one more. Okay, let's go here. So this is the Neolithic settlement of Dimini in northern Greece. So when the first farmers arrived in Greece, 7000 BC or so, they live in Sesklo, which is this large settlement, a little bit like kind of the style of Çatalhöyük sort of thing, coming from Anatolia. And they live in this quite large settlement. Then Sesklo wanes, And then this place, Dimini, grows. So it's a Neolithic place, roundabout, it ends sort of 3000 BC, thereabouts. I can't remember the exact, maybe get the exact dates for me, Flint, here. But basically, it seems like it seems like it's abandoned. And this, in the bottom left-hand corner, that is not Neolithic. That is a Bronze Age Mycenaean tholos tomb that's been built into the side of this Neolithic settlement. So why have they done this? They have, seems like some Bronze Age Mycenaean Greeks have come along and they've kind of stamped themselves onto this place. And they've decided to associate themselves with this settlement. Whether they actually have anything to do with it, it didn't really matter, I think. I think they wanted to associate themselves with some vaunted ancestors to make a claim on the land. So it says to me that there is ancient history for the Bronze Age Greeks. They had a conception of their own past that we can only, we can't even, we don't know what it was, but they did. They would have been telling stories about the people who lived at this place. And pretty interesting. And this is not alone. You can find these kind of echoes all over the place. You find little bits and bobs that are out of place. So, for example, artifacts that are like 1,000 years removed from their original.
I was going to mention that exact thing. Yeah.
So 1,000 years removed from their making. And it makes me think, was there some sort of Mycenaean lord or something who would sit in his palace and look at this thing from 1,000 years before and think about who those earlier people were? And almost like a proto-museum, So, and now let's go back a couple of slides.
Just to butt in for a quick second, you mentioned these artifacts that are out of place at Nicoria. There's actually a collection, even though the earliest occupation of the site is the Middle Helladic, there's actually occupation, there's no occupation there in the early Helladic, but there's a collection of these really distinct cups there, which the excavators think were collected again and used as kind of relics of the past or something like that. Yeah, exactly. Good point.
So there's a harking back to the age before, and they
exactly
would have been thinking about who these people were. So let's go back. Okay, so this is a good example. This is the Mycenaean Acropolis on the island of Paros, which is in the middle of the Cycladic Islands, next to Naxos. Amazing place. Thanks to whoever took this photo. I just, again, took this just before the conversation started. But there's a Mycenaean Acropolis on the top of the island. And in that Mycenaean Acropolis, there was a Cycladic idol that was found from the early Cycladic culture, which is removed by 1,000 years. And it was in the layers, it was in the late Bronze Age layers, basically. And it's an early Bronze Age. Maybe you could find a Cycladic, the people probably here probably know.
Cycladic figurine. Yeah, I'll get one.
The really cool, really unique sort of stylized art. And this culture had been gone for a millennia.
These kind of things, these folded arm figurines are sometimes called as well, because they look like they're cold.
They do, they're shivering. This is not Mycenaean, but at this place somebody had found this and they thought, this is interesting, I'm going to keep it. And it was in a part of the Acropolis there. So that's somebody thinking about their own past, I think.
I fully agree.
And then if we go back one more, the same sort of thing was found here, which is Akrotiri on Thera, which isn't a Mycenaean settlement. This is the famous sort of Pompeii of the Bronze Age that was destroyed by the eruption, the Santorini eruption in like 1600 BC or thereabouts. But again, same sort of thing. The early Cycladic figurine in the much later habitation layers. Someone had found it and they thought, this is a connection to the past. This is important. This is interesting. And I just love this idea of, like proto-archaeology going on in the deep past. I think the first archaeological dig I could find in history was in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, where Nebuchadnezzar did a bit of archaeology. Which is much later than this. But,
I had Muthi al-Rashid on the channel in her new book. I have it right here, Between Two Rivers. Let me grab it. Advertise it for you, Muthi.
Does she talk about
this is about the world's first museum in Babylon, and it's about the story that these artifacts tell. These artifacts out of time, if you will.
And this is Nebuchadnezzar.
Kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. His daughter, I think. Yeah.
So that's kind of the first, I think, recorded incident of this happening. But it seems like to me that maybe it was a similar thing going on, possibly. Maybe there was someone who was interested in the world that had come before, like we are today.
That's exactly the perfect point to end on. That's what we're here to talk about.
There were people just like us.
And could you imagine what some future archaeologists would think of the British Museum? They'd be so confused.
Absolutely.
Until they realize it's a museum, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. But even our own homes, you know, we have keepsakes from grandparents, things from great grandparents sometimes in our houses.
Oh, wait, I'm looking that way. Yeah. No, exactly. And these kind of antiques, and we get a lot of them. One of the cool things we get is a lot of them from the Mycenaean period, also in later periods. So we have this clear example of those Tholos tombs. There's kind of tomb cult going on with people cleaning the land. Right. Carla Antonaccio has some good articles on that. And so there's also these kind of keepsakes at Left Candy, Left Candy, it's this Iron Age cemetery. And there they have these antiques going back, I think nearly 1,000 years, one of them goes back. So they're even before the Mycenaean period. And so there's a relationship with the past. And you can see that through the archaeology, through the material culture that's there.
Absolutely. And of course, many of the Mycenaean settlements continue to be built on because people just wanted to be associated with the past as well. So like you get often temples and things built on top of much older citadels.
So are you okay to answer some questions?
I can try.
Okay, well, let's first start off. So for those who don't know, I give my patrons the chance to ask questions in advance. So they knew Pete was coming on, so they have some tough ones for you, man. So hypothetically speaking, if you were to fund an archaeological excavation for the purposes of investigating as much as possible about a site, which site would you choose and why? It's a good one.
So you want me to answer?
Yeah, this is for you. Yeah,
the
next one I think is for me, but yeah.
I would probably choose one of the citadels that I mentioned earlier. Maybe one of the ones that I didn't mention actually, but there are plenty all over Greece that are kind of like not much is known about them. So I'd choose one of those. Maybe Thisbe.
That was
choose that place and just find everything about it.
And that region of Greece does not have enough archaeology anyway. That central Greece region. I mean, there's some people doing stuff, but not enough.
Yeah, that did seem to be the case to me. I mean, or I might choose Glar, but I think already a lot has been known about Glar. But and
there's people working there now.
It's a very cool place. But probably one of these lost citadels. Lost citadels. It's a nice tagline. They're not really lost, but unexcavated.
Just like Troy was lost. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So I'd probably choose one of the Mycenaean centers in Greece. Yeah.
Okay. If it was me, if you wanted me to answer the question, I'd actually go back to Nicoria. That was excavated back in the 70s by a team out of the University of Minnesota. And not a whole lot has happened since. There were some Greek rescue excavations of the cemetery around it by the Archaeological Service, which did a really good job. In fact, I studied some of their animal remains for them. But there's not been enough of the settlement, and it really was the type site for this transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. And so I think going back to it with the additions of all the studies that have happened would give us a new eye because it was excavated 50 years ago.
Oh, amazing. I've just thought of something else. I'm actually very greedy with my history. I love early medieval history. I love Bronze Age history. I love Mesoamerican history. So it's just popped into my head that maybe I'd have to choose an early medieval hill fort in Wales.
Well, you're gonna have to come down here, man. Bring your YouTube money. Let's excavate something.
Of course, you're in Wales. You're in Cardiff.
Yeah, I'm in Cardiff.
Yeah. Oh, see, I absolutely love Wales. Yeah, big up Wales.
Yeah, I'm gonna hopefully. Our department has an excavation going on right now in Cardiff, so I'm gonna go down there and get some footage and try to make a YouTube video of it.
Fantastic.
The Kyre Hillford area.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah,
I've been there.
nice.
I've been there. Yeah. That's an amazing place.
You got to come down here. We got to do an in-person one of these at some point.
That'd be cool. That'd be cool.
That'd be a lot of fun.
I can do that. I can do that.
Yeah.
It's got a big church on top, hasn't it? That Hillfort. There's like a lot. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I think there's some Norman stuff, and then there's Iron Age. Yeah.
Yeah, and really all sorts of cool stuff. Okay, next question. This is going to sound silly, but I've always loved the booby traps in Indiana Jones. Before investigating sites, is this something archaeologists prepare to encounter, and have there been any close calls? I know there aren't giant boulders chasing you, but I've always wondered whether traps are still encountered. So, what's your craziest life and death experience on an archaeological site? I'll then tell mine. By the way, the answer is no. I've never come across any actual traps. So just to make sure that's clear, even in any tombs that I've excavated, like the Griffin Warrior tomb, nothing like that. So what's your craziest life and death experience?
Let me think.
I've had a few.
You probably have more than me. I don't have many life and death.
Well, you mentioned to be careful when you go up hills.
True.
So that's you must have fallen down once or twice.
True. I can't think of much life and death, to be honest. You say yours first, and I'll have a think.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I've had a few close-ish calls. One of them is from that survey I mentioned at Corfos Kalamianos, where there were all those terraces in that Mycenaean port. That was this really crazy rocky terrain with these thorn bushes that were like so dense with thorns this far. And one time I was climbing like a cliff face, and I fell backwards. And if I would have not had a backpack on, I would have basically impaled myself on I don't know how many thorns, but the backpack and my hat thankfully absorbed almost all of them, and I was okay. But the most life and death experience I faced was at Pylos, where the Palace of Nestor at Pylos has a bunch of vipers, these little black poisonous vipers that live in the area. And we've had a lot of encounters with them. They normally leave you alone. It's not a big deal as long as you're wearing boots. Doesn't matter. They're not going to be able to climb you or bite you or anything like that. So you mostly can ignore them as long as you have on good shoes and not sandals. But there was this one time where I'd been away from the project for several months, and the students that had been in this trench, when you excavate, you want to understand the different stratigraphy, right? So layers of soil and how they relate to one another. And I was field director, so I had to analyze this and put together our plan of the relationship between one layer to another. And this one trench, it's just the person that had been digging in there. I don't even know who it was, so this is not meant to cast any shade. Instead of having a straight wall where you could read the different layers really clearly, the wall was sloping, which means things are a little muddled and you can't see them. And so I had to go in there and with a pickaxe, cut back to straighten the profile and then draw it and map it out and stuff like that was what I was there for. And so unbeknownst to me, when I started hacking at it with my pickaxe, there was a viper that fell out right by my feet. And this was a deep-ass trench. We're talking 3 meters down, so over 10 feet down. And I jumped up on one of these big Mycenaean walls, but I couldn't get out of the trench from there. So my only way out was to go through the viper and back up. So I still have my pickaxe in my hand, and I was just like, what do? I don't fucking know. Like, this thing's already very irritated at me for disturbing it. And so I timed it. I jumped down and I chopped that viper in half, and then I was able to get out of the trench.
Yeah, fair enough.
I've heard of people. There was this guy who was trapped in the photographer at Abydos in Egypt when I was working there the year before I got there. He was trapped in the black room where this is back in the 90s or early 2000s, where he was processing, manually the photographs. And so he was processing them, and he got trapped in there. There was an asp that blocked his way out, and he kept shouting, but everybody was asleep because it was the middle of the night. And he was stuck in there all night until somebody finally heard him, and they were able to kill the asp so that he could get out. Yeah, so snakes are real, like Indiana Jones. Snakes are a real danger. Not very common, but they are a real danger. Yeah.
Well, I live in a country where the most dangerous animal is probably maybe an angry badger. So
humans.
yeah, humans would be the worst. So no, I don't really have any of these swashbuckling tales. I mean, the worst might be when I was in Japan. I was wandering around in areas in the very north of Japan where there are lots of man-eating bears, but didn't come across any. But I made sure to make the bears aware that I was there. So I was walking
with snakes too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was walking along, blaring out heavy metal on my phone, and singing and speaking loudly and saying, "Don't eat me, bears, please. I don't want to die." Because there'd been a lot of bear attacks at that point, because it was sort of not long after COVID, I think, and the bears had started coming back into villages and towns and things a little bit more. But yeah, no, I didn't come across any.
But that's the key with snakes too. If you're walking through an area,
make yourself known.
Walk really loud.
Exactly.
They're more scared of you than you are of them.
100%.
But of course, if you disturb one, then either get the fuck away really quickly or kill it or something. Because that's going to be a disturbed snake.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, last one. This one I think is for you more than me, though I can try to stab at it as well. When researching a civilization for fun, where do you recommend beginning? I've been interested in learning British and UK history, but I don't really know where to begin. I was thinking about perhaps buying A History of the English Peoples by Winston Churchill in an attempt to see the big picture items such as the Magna Carta, the unification of Britain. Of course, I'd take whatever Churchill has to say with a grain of salt, but would this be a good idea? What's your thoughts?
Personally, I probably wouldn't pick Churchill.
Out of date.
I think it's very well written and newer stuff, but it's quite it's I don't know, very 70 years old or something. So yeah, I would maybe go for, to be honest, I'm a big fan of popular history books, so I'd probably go for a up-to-date popular history book. Maybe like Mark Morris is a very good popular historian, so his book on the Norman Conquest, fantastic. His book on the Anglo-Saxons, fantastic. He's got lots of good ones on later medieval periods as well. Dan Jones, good popular historian. There's lots of them, and I would start there and then find something in those books that you're like, oh, I want to learn more about that, and then you can get a book on that, and you can go a little bit more precise. You can go a little bit more niche, and you can keep going from that. And you can keep going. You can look at the wider, bigger picture, and then you can choose what to look at in more detail. That's how I do it. And then eventually you'll develop more of a knowledge base, and then you know what to investigate further. And you can look at some academic journals. There's a lot of them you can get for free online, and you can find out exactly what the scholars think. But to be honest, either popular history books begin with, or documentaries. There's a lot of good documentaries. Or
YouTube, History Time. I hear has some really good documentaries. Yeah,
History Time. No, I was going to say, Michael Wood, absolutely fantastic documentaries filled with all sorts of amazing information. Possibly a little bit out of date sometimes, but the general gist is great still. Bettany Hughes, loads of them out there. So yeah, I agree. Start popular and then go a bit more zoomed in as you go further along and learn more, basically.
That's actually what I would suggest as well, is start with like documentaries or YouTube, these channels here, other channels of people that do legit history and archaeology. And then, like we all cite our sources on screen or in the details all the time. And like I host interviews with people that are writing these kind of popular books all the time too, as well as those that have YouTube channels. And so that's actually where I'd start with something more popular to get the big picture, and then dive in more and more in depth towards the specific angles that you're interested in. And with that, go to the bibliography,
I love this comment that Ninhotep has said. I love gateway books that lead to other books that lead to other books. Yeah. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. And also, as you just said, look in the bibliography, because you can always find, where they've got their information from, and you can keep going further down the rabbit hole. And that's my life basically.
Yeah, and as Sarah here says, the local university library or bookstore. Yep. And so, absolutely. There's a lot of university libraries you can get in as a visitor for free. And then
just your local, your local library. I mean, most cities still have one somewhere. They've not all been destroyed yet by austerity. But yeah, go to your local library, and there's loads of great popular history books in them.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. All right. Let's, I guess, open up a few questions from the chat. This guy left, but we can answer his question really quickly. Did Mycenaean culture extend to southern Greek Isles, or is that Minoan, or both? So that changes with time. The Minoans culture seemed to dominate these sort of southern Greek islands like Crete and even Santorini. But to be honest, some of we mentioned Santorini several times. Some of the more up-to-date research on Santorini shows a Mycenaean influence right before it's destroyed by that eruption. I think there's like cookpots and stuff like that that show more Mycenaean influence, and there's some thoughts on some of the wall paintings. So yeah, so I think that there's definitely a change. The Minoans are more culturally influential earlier on, up until say the 15th century or so BCE, and then it becomes more the Mycenaeans down till about 1200 BCE. Yeah. Let's see. What else? Somebody mentioned about the teeth on boar's tusk helmets. Yes, I saw somebody asking about bones maybe being used. Bones are not very durable or strong, at least especially not bones from smaller species like pigs. Enamel is very dense, and that's why it works very well as an armor. So teeth are good, but bone is not. And on that note, somebody mentioned the confusion comes from us calling wild boar and us calling male domestic pigs boar. Yes, this is an English confusion, I think, and a modern language confusion that has caused people to think that these are domestic pigs rather than wild boar rather than domestic pigs. And so I think it's one of those anachronisms that I was trying to get across in many ways.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Minoans had those themes right. Yes. As you brought up that octopus stirrup jar, that was like a copy of earlier Minoan type octopus stirrup jars.
A style that survived.
Yeah.
Carried on.
We already answered the question about the Vikings. So
the Nordic Bronze Age is very interesting, which is kind of like similar time to the Mycenaean Greeks.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that in the chat, and I lost the comment.
I don't know of any direct interaction that is known of between the Nordic Bronze Age and the Mycenaean world, but there's certainly interactions going down the Danube, as far as I'm aware. So there's trade moving back and forth along the Danube down into Greece from up there. So, who knows? It's not completely impossible that nobody travelled between these two places, as far as I'm aware, anyway. But I'm more willing to just go out on a limb.
No, I think you're probably right, because there's that new study that just came out. I just highlighted the video in my post that Megalith Hunter had made on the tin from Cornwall, making it down to the Mediterranean at that point. So, I mean, look, if there's trade from Cornwall all the way to Greece, it's not that surprising that there's down the line exchange also from the Nordics to the British Isles all the way down.
And so, you look at all the Nordic Bronze Age rock art. It's all ships. As well, so it's not impossible to think that somebody may have taken a ship downriver.
I fully agree. I fully agree. No, that's just a nice comment. Wait, I lost my comments. Where did they go? Somebody asked and gave me a super chat. Thank you, Carl. Can I talk to Dr. Nigel Kennel about the difference between archaeology of Sparta and the written record? Yes, I will definitely have a video on that. Whether I talk to Nigel or someone else, we'll do something on that for sure, because there's a big difference.
A huge difference. I've been to Sparta, and it's not a very impressive site. I mean, it's cool, but it's
a cool Roman site.
Yeah. But there's not much there, really. Compare it to some of the other classical places. There's really not much.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody asked about the Mycenaean Palace in Thebes. Have you been there?
I have been there. Unfortunately, it's mostly underneath modern city streets.
Yes,
but there's little bits that are accessible that you can look at. And as far as I'm aware, it was one of the wealthiest.
Yeah, it was definitely very wealthy. And there's a lot of the few linear B tablets we have mentioned textiles. And there's a bunch of cool stirrup jars and other things that have been excavated from graves in the area. So it was definitely a wealthy area with elites and with texts and art and stuff like that. But yeah, it's disturbed a lot, just like Athens is disturbed a lot by the classical city. And then because of the development of the modern city of Thebes, it's over most of the archaeology. So it's tough for archaeologists to access.
Interesting area as well, though, because there's again, like Mycenae, there's a lot of satellite centers all around. There's a place called Utresis. I don't know if you've ever been there. That's super interesting.
Yeah, very cool stuff. Yeah,
and that needs to be excavated more, I think. Do you know when that was last excavated?
Maybe like a long time ago. Like that's an old excavation. It was maybe
100
like
years
50s.
ago.
Yeah, 100 years ago, 50s, maybe somewhere around there. Yeah.
So I
don't think there's anything new.
Give a lot of information.
Yeah. All right. So we have some more recent questions as well that have popped in. There are vase depictions from archaic Greece that show Mycenaean-style helmets for heroes like Ajax and Achilles. Do you know about them through excavations or oral depictions? I don't think there's any Bronze Age-style helmets on Ajax, on mythical heroes from archaic vase paintings that I can think of. But they would have gone into some of those tombs, so they might have known about some of them. But I don't think there's any boar's tusk helmets, for example, that are that late. I think they're all depicted earlier. There is one from the Iron Age. There's these marching soldiers, and they have Iron Age type shields, but they have boar's tusk helmets. But that's all I can think of that shows something more archaicizing. Can you think of anything?
No, I know that. Well, not much to go on. There's some interesting geometric depictions of sort of like potentially the age.
That's
of
what I was thinking. Geometric,
before, but they're not exactly very detailed.
Yeah, of course not. They're geometric.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're quite simplistic. I mean, I think that I like the geometric era, but it's kind of like a forgotten era a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think it's a fantastic era, in fact, in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
In fact, that could be a whole nother discussion on the geometric people and their relationship with Mycenaean culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is sort of Lefkandi that you mentioned is kind of like
exactly
that era, and it's a huge site, and it's like there's a lot going on there. Yeah.
And there's a lot of new excavations that all of our stuff is out of date by now, at least what I know even. I actually don't know much about the Pellicastro Cemetery at Arcadia. Do you know much about it?
I do think I know where they're talking about. It's again been excavated by the Swedes, and there's a valley begins with A, but it's Arcadia is a really cool place. That's absolutely stunning. For me, that's one of the most stunning areas of the whole of Greece. And if you go kind of like not in the summer as well, when there's fog and mist rolling down the mountainsides, it's a beautiful place. It's a big mortuary complex. I can't think of anything more.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I don't know much. I've never worked in Arcadia, so I don't know much about the details of all the sites.
I know that there's about 15 or 20 Paleocastros in Greece as well.
Yes, there are. That I know. I know more about some other ones.
Yeah, there's an old castle everywhere.
Yeah, the Paleocastro by Pylos. In fact, that's a fantastic fortress in Navarino, as it's sometimes called, or the Paleocastro on Crete, where there's an awesome Minoan site.
That's one of the best ones. Yeah.
So there's a lot of them. Yeah, there's like dozens.
That's a lot.
Do you ever find any spindles or whorls or other textile tools in association with sheep or goat bones? Yes, Sarah, we have. But however, the goat and sheep bones there are probably just from butchered for meat. And so they don't necessarily have to do with any wool production. The spindles and spindle whorls are a common find in pretty much every house I think I've ever excavated from almost any period in Greece. From the Neolithic onwards, we find spindles and whorls. So yeah, they're very common finds. And I know somebody, in fact, if you remember that picture of the goats, there were those white goats drinking out of a pond. That was taken by my friend Alina Yanku, who studies these. So if we have her on in the future, she'd be the person to ask about how they're used and how they change over time. Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions? Do you see any? Is there anything we should avoid when looking for good history books? This is a good question. You should go first.
assertions made with no evidence whatsoever.
Yeah, that would be one thing.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, I would say. If somebody is asserting something and they are saying that they know it 100%, question it. Particularly in archaeology, because it's, these are things that there's some speculation. I mean, obviously with what you do, Flint, there's much more that you know for a fact you've taken this thing out of the ground. But people will make assertions that think a thing they know 100% what it was used for and why. And I think you should steer clear from that, because nothing is concrete really when it comes to interpretations.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd actually say the clearest thing that's easiest for people to identify is when you read a book that's written for the public that is saying, I know more than the entire scholarly community. As soon as you see something like that, that should raise a red flag that, look, the scholarly community are the people that know the details of archaeology and history and stuff like that. We work first to convince each other before we try to convince the public who doesn't know as much about these details. So if they're trying to convince the public that everybody's wrong except for them, that's a big red flag, because look, I mean, we might have minor disagreements. I have my thoughts on goats at the end of the end of the Bronze Age that maybe a few people disagree with, but it doesn't mean I'm saying that all my colleagues are wrong on everything, right? You know, I have a lot of respect for all my colleagues and all the hard work they do, even if we disagree on X point or Y point or A point or B point. And so it's that kind of rhetoric that, hey, I know more than everybody else. That shows that they're trying to appeal to the public that can't judge the veracity of their claims.
I know more than the people who've spent their entire lives working on it for very little pay.
Yeah. Let's see.
Is it probable that Plato? Oh, sorry, you do yours first. But
no,
is it probable that Plato based his legend of Atlantis off of the older culture and possibly another?
That's Atlantis. I guess for me, since I'm writing a book on it. In short, you should wait for my videos and my book. But in real short, no. In real short, no. It's really clear this is a philosophical allegory, and Plato tells us that in the dialogue very clearly. But there's a lot of cool, interesting facts besides just yes or no to that question, which is why you should wait for my videos and books on it. Let's see. If the Trojan War really doesn't happen, is there really not a single kernel of truth to it? Is there really not a single evidence of conflict between Troy and the mainland Greeks? Oh, Baton, that's a tough one. In a sense, we know that all the places are real, but then again, that's like saying Batman takes place in New York City. Does that mean Batman is real because we know New York City is real? No, we have no evidence at all of some large-scale conflict between the Greeks of what would be mainland modern Greece and between the Trojans and what we call modern Turkey. There is no clear evidence. There's speculation one way or the other that maybe some conflict happened, but there's no good evidence one way or the other. So you can really believe whatever you want, but there's no good evidence one way or the other.
There is some evidence, just to continue on what Flint said, of possible interactions between the Hittites and the Ahiawans, who possibly were the Mycenaean Greeks of the mainland, or even like of Asia Minor, because the Mycenaeans were in places like Miletus on the coast and Bodrum. So there may be some interaction going on, but whether it was like a Trojan War, like made it into the myths, it was probably completely different to that. But I think, Flint, that there may have been some sort of conflict going on that maybe inspired the myths at some point, like a kernel at the very heart of it. But again,
and the question is when, even, because we have some of these myths. So it's clear we have, like I said, arms and armor from the 16th century, which is not the 13th century, the height of Mycenaean culture. And so, and then we have kernels of it that are also from the Iron Age. So yeah, it's a big, who the hell knows is my answer. Maybe.
Oh no, maybe I've lost you, Flint.
Oh no.
The internet's gone.
Uh-oh. Is it my internet?
Oh no, okay.
You're still here for me.
Probably my internet, to be honest. I lost you when you were talking there.
I was just gonna say that, who the hell knows is the real answer. we're not going to.
Basically, yeah. People have written books on it, and there's some really good ones actually.
There are.
Yeah. There's a big what's he called? Barry Strauss. He wrote a good popular history book on the Trojan War, which I found pretty interesting. But again, it's highly speculative, but it's a good read. He does mention all of the evidence that we know of, but like there's not evidence for the Trojan War. It's just sort of like, oh, I've lost you.
Yeah. Oh, I lost you now. You there?
Oh. Oh well, I was rambling
let's
anyway.
take one last question and then let's call it. Unless you see a really good one you want to answer. There's this awesome. I'll do a video on this at some point. But there's this black figure pottery of Ajax and Achilles playing a board game. So Baton, you're one of my big supporters. So I definitely want to make sure I answer this. There's not just one black figure pottery of this. There's over 100 depictions of Ajax and Achilles playing a board game on the beach at Troy in all kinds of different pottery styles, black figure, red figure, white ground lekythoi, and other kinds of styles as well. And what's really cool about this is good evidence of a story that we don't have any textual evidence for, because there's no scene in the Iliad of Achilles and Ajax playing a board game on the beach of Troy, but we have hundreds of depictions of this. And in every single one, what's really cool is sometimes some of these vases, the artists, they put words on there, right? And they put the words as if they're coming out of their mouth. And every single time they're shouting out numbers, and Achilles is always beating Ajax. So Achilles will say 3 and Ajax will say 2. Or on another one, he'll say 4 and Ajax will say 3. And so it's very clearly a known story that the classical Greeks knew about, but we don't have anything other than these artistic evidence for it. And we have hundreds of representations, which is pretty cool. It's not just one, but hundreds. So yeah.
It's cool. It's really cool. It's really interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, the history of board games is fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Like, you can go back to the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan culture, and they have board games there. And I think they're earliest dice as well. Like, we're all the same. We've always been the same. People in the past is just us.
It's so true. We're all people, and we should have appreciation for that. And that, I think, is the perfect moral, let's say, ethic to end on. Thank you all. Remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment to both Pete Kelly and myself. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you, Pete. It's been fantastic. And
I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot, Flint. I've learned a lot. You have to please send me these studies.
Yeah, I will. And my ending song and credits for everybody. Rhymes and riddles, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, Flint on Dibble. Rhymes and riddles. R.M. Brown wrote this for me.
Yeah, nice.
He was making fun of my name, and then he realized I was an archaeologist, so we did a collaboration together. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you all. Flint on Dibble.